action against Russia, against the Kremlin, to demonstrate our continuing opposition to its Nord Stream 2 pipeline and others like it. The United States has been clear in its support for the rights of our European allies and partners to have reliable choices for energy, choices that are not conditioned on political and military pressure from the Kremlin. We've been hard at work assisting and promoting more energy options for Europe. These options include successes in Belarus, Croatia, and Lithuania, among many others. In contrast, the Kremlin has continued to push Nord Stream 2 in its effort to exploit and expand European dependence on Russian energy. Ukraine's energy infrastructure serves as a deterrent to Russian aggression, yet the Kremlin now seeks to undermine Ukraine by making that infrastructure obsolete. The Action Secretary Pompeo announced today is intended to counter Russian malign influence. Our action sends a clear signal about this administration's determination to use the tools we have. We aim to support transatlantic energy security goals. The administration's deep and long-standing concerns are shared by a strong bipartisan majority in Congress. That includes concerns about Nord Stream 2 and the second line of Turk Stream, another Kremlin-backed pipeline project in southern Europe. The Department of State is issuing updated public guidance for Section 232 of CATSA, the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, in order to expand implementation of the Act. This includes investments for other activities related to a broader scope of Russian energy export pipelines for Nord Stream 2, as well as the second line of Turk Stream. We know Russia's Gazprom is attempting to protect its decades-long near monopoly for supplying gas to Europe. Today's update to CATSA goes a long way to buttress our overall diplomatic approach. We're working with our European allies and partners on projects that diversify rather than limit their options. Our ultimate goal is to enhance transatlantic energy security by way of expanded energy suppliers, routes, and types of fuel, including investments in renewables and nuclear energy. Thank you, and with that, I'm happy to take a few questions.
Let's try the phone line again when it's tested out. Do we have Will Malden from the Wall Street Journal? Will? No? Okay. What about Lara Jakes, New York Times? Our phone line died? Okay. Yeah, I called them both. Not working. Okay. Nick, go ahead.
Okay, good to see you. On the Nord Stream sanctions, you just mentioned that you want to give European allies more choice for energy security, but it sounds a little like if they make the wrong choice, in other words, continue with Nord Stream 2, that you're going to threaten sanctions against them. That doesn't seem like much of a choice.
Well, in terms of the choices, we've been hard at work at helping the diversification efforts in Europe. The Secretary spoke to a few of these, referenced some of these. I mean, Belarus, for example, has expanded its suppliers of crude oil beyond Russia. Lithuania has an LNG import vessel that brings gas from Norway, among other sources. Poland is expanding LNG terminals and considering floating LNG and sourcing through Norway as well. Many other European countries, Ukraine, Greece, Bulgaria, Serbia, Croatia, Italy, and Romania, are further diversifying their ways away from European energy. So our work is longstanding in terms of the diversification objectives. We're very pleased by the trend line and continue to see that through.
But just to be clear, if Germany does proceed, or German companies do proceed with partnership with Russia on Nord Stream, they will face U.S. sanctions under CATSA, is that right?
We've been clear for 2 years now that any parties involved in the Russian natural gas export pipeline business faces sanctions risk. We've been clear about that. Continuing on, what has changed is the continued escalation on the part of the Kremlin on this, and this is a direct response to that in terms of that guidance change.
Okay, for our next question, let's try the phone lines once again. And could we try the line of Connor Finnegan?
You've probably just answered all the questions.
Okay, so we'll keep it in the room here. Let's go to Hallie in the back.
Thank you. I actually have a question for Chris, if
Yeah.
that's okay. So I'm just wondering, broadly speaking, how you would characterize U.S.-Russia relations at this moment in time. And yesterday, on a phone call between Secretary Pompeo and Foreign Minister Lavrov, they discussed a possible P5 meeting in the near future. I'm wondering if you can provide any more details and why it would be a good idea for President Trump and President Putin to meet at this moment in time.
Sure. So I don't have anything specific on the P5, but I do think it speaks to the broader effort. And that is, and the president's been clear, it would be in our interest to have better relations with Russia. We have a range of dialogues with the Russian government across a range of different issues. But for that dialogue to improve and for the relationship to improve, Russia needs to end its aggression, whether it's in Ukraine or whether it's interference in our internal affairs or the affairs and the elections of our friends and allies. Russia needs to cease its aggression for that bilateral relationship to improve. So we continue to talk to them, but like with the action we're taking today, we're also taking steps so that we can effectively and consistently counter Russian aggression and work with our allies and partners to do so.
And has there been any progress in U.S.-Russia relations, would you say, over the past year?
In some ways, there has been. We've begun discussions on arms control and strategic stability, as you've been briefed on in the past. We have resumed a U.S.-Russia counterterrorism dialogue in order to protect our national interests. We've had very frank conversations about where we disagree, whether it's interference in our affairs, Russia's own treatment of its own citizens. We have a very frank conversation about that because we have the dialogue channels. But we've also been effective at countering Russian aggression. And again, the action today helps us reinforce that message so that hopefully over time we can get the relationship on a better footing.
Thank you.
Torsten?
Yeah, back to Nord Stream and Germany. And the question is, when you say you're adjusting the guidelines, does it mean that you are not getting the concern from the European side that you were expecting for your cause and addressing Russia? And if so, why not?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question.
So when you talk to your European partners,
Yeah.
and you're saying now you have to adjust the issue of Nord Stream, the new sanctions and
Yes.
way. Is it that when you talk to your European partners, Germany, France, etc., is it that you don't get the same level of concern about Russia that you have, and if so, why?
We see a growing concern in Europe for Russia's ability to use energy for malign purposes. But in terms of the specific countries, why don't I ask Chris to comment?
Sure. I think you see a growing majority of countries that are concerned about Nord Stream 2 and the impact it would have on European energy security, or, as Frank laid out, enabling Russian aggression. And so we are adding our voice to those European voices today that are concerned about Russian aggression, and how do we effectively counter that? The tools that we have made available today help reinforce that message.
Sorry, my question is also for Chris, but I do appreciate you being here. It is nice to see you, and we do still love you. In the Lavrov call yesterday, I'm wondering if the topic of Russian bounties in Afghanistan came up and if that was discussed.
I can't get into all of our discussions. I think the Secretary's been very clear that we have a frank conversation with Russia with regard to Afghanistan. We have taken steps to address all threats, and we will continue to do so, whether it's from Russia or Iran or any other actor. We will take the steps necessary. But I think, sort of pivoting back to what we're talking about today, we are consistent about pushing back against Russian aggression. That's what we're doing today with our steps with regard to expanding CAATSA authorities to protect European energy security. And we will be and have been consistent in pushing back on Russian aggression wherever we find it.
You can't say if that specific issue was addressed.
Again, I don't have anything to address on that conversation, but the Secretary has been very clear about Russia and Afghanistan.
Thank you.
All right, let's take one last swipe at going to the phone lines. And let's try Will Malden from Wall Street Journal. Okay, can't say we didn't try. We'll take maybe one or two more. James?
My question is for the Assistant Secretary. You're familiar with the maxim that war is a continuation of politics by other means. And I wonder how you might assess the view from Russia or from other observers that with these kinds of moves announced today, the United States is simply pursuing energy competition via other means?
Yeah, that's a false narrative, and I suspect you referenced the narratives coming from Russia, and they would have said in their interest to convey that idea. You know, we've been consistent in supporting diversification regardless of where that energy comes from or the type of energy. We've continued to, and very pleased to see the Southern Gas Corridor bringing Azeri gas in over to Western Europe. That's moving forward finally. We're very pleased to see that happen. The Secretary has been a leader in promoting energy development in the Eastern Mediterranean. And so that's another area of again, non-U.S. gas coming in, but it's for the purposes of improving the diversity and the security of Europe. We're certainly proud of the U.S. energy as an important component to support the security of friends and allies around the world. But that's not the primary objective here. The primary objective is to improve the resilience and the security of European nations, to diversify away from a variety of sources. Some of those are including developing sources like those I mentioned in the Eastern Med.
Okay. One last question in the back, Tracy.
Thank you. Final point on Russia, sorry for Chris, or actually for either of you.
Would you answer?
Given what you've said about Russia's malign behavior, is it still the plan to invite them to join a G7 meeting? And would you recommend that they be invited?
So the Secretary has answered this before, that this is a discussion for the G7 members, but it is important to have dialogue with Russia. But we've also been clear and consistent about calling out Russia and holding Russia to account for its malign activities. And so those two elements of our bilateral relationship will continue, and we will continue to do that in partnership with our G7 partners and with all of our NATO and European allies and partners.
Thank you.
Thanks.